Sports require a lot of investment, but the people at the heart of our favorite sporting events matter too. So it's awesome when you can root for the people you support, and UFC's got plenty of great individuals to choose from. Now, we've all got our favorite champions, and everyone's got a right to their opinion. In this video, we'll talk about some of the biggest controversial UFC fighters ever, so make sure to stay until the end. First up, it's Georges St-Pierre. St-Pierre fought a lot in the championships. He's probably participated more than all the others on this list when it comes to the UFC. However, Georges got plenty of controversy around him too, so the fans are often divided. St-Pierre's past shows that he was unable to finish his fights on several occasions. This is the thing that became a negative aspect of the welterweight title holder. This is a usual point of disagreement, but he's indeed struggled to finish fights. However, by far the most controversial thing about St-Pierre was his showdown in the second round with BJ Penn. The champion was accused of greasing, which landed him an advantage over Penn, and George denies it. But it was all caught on camera, so it was sorta hard to just listen to him and let this one go. But don't let all that stop you from seeing Georges St-Pierre in action. Next up, there's Michael Bisping. This champion didn't have a moment that exactly ended up dividing the people around him, but he was for sure different from all the other middleweights. The thing with Bisping was that he wasn't exactly afraid of saying what he wanted to say. The filter was almost non-existent. The stunt he pulled with a coach on The Ultimate Fighter made some people angry. Plus, the man's fighting history in the UFC also divided the people. His fights were thought of as being too general. He never really changed things up when his opponent was from a different discipline. Moreover, that painful snub when Michael was announced the winner with a split decision verdict that went in his favor at UFC 75 over Matt Hamill, it was unbelievable because it was plain as day that he'd lost. It was even more upsetting when we think about how the bout occurred in London, England. That was Bisping's home, and it was also used for promoting the sport overseas. We never could shake off the feeling that it was all done so the UFC could keep their biggest European draw on the safe side. So yeah, that was a pretty neat controversy if you're interested in things that divided the people over UFC fights. Further up, Rampage Jackson. Jackson in his career at the UFC had some contentious moments, alright. There's a lot to keep in mind when talking about this. Jackson was in and out of retirement since 2009. He was truly obnoxious while being a coach on The Ultimate Fighter, and he was arrested on felony reckless driving charges. And many people were ticked off about how he abandoned this career to pursue one in Hollywood. But hey, you can't exactly hold it against him that he played a character that looks totally like him, Mr. T. Whatever your opinions on the subject, Jackson never really got down to it by pulling punches, but he just loved to trash talk. He yelled at his opponents and called himself God's street soldier. He was quite a unique character for sure. Moving on, we've got Josh Koscheck. It seemed that this champion thrived on being hated, and he got a whole lot of it every time he was in the center of that octagon. Notably, Kos managed to create a lot of controversy through his public comments ahead of his bout at UFC 124 in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, where he was set to face Georges St-Pierre. Koscheck connected with Jason Ellis's XM radio and proceeded to just trash talk all Canadian fans supporting St-Pierre. Cries of "Canada sucks" were suddenly all over the radio waves. But this whole episode came after he repeatedly made fun of his opponent during their time on The Ultimate Fighter as coaches. It was then kinda oddly satisfying when he ended up losing to St-Pierre. Maybe he should have put his money where his mouth was. Yeah, maybe it's alright to lose to one of UFC's top welterweights, but you gotta admit, it's hard to not dislike the guy. At the end of the day, Josh behaved and spoke like a high schooler, and it doesn't help that it looked like he enjoyed bashing everyone. Up next, there's Nick Diaz. Nick could often be found bashing the media, and if you followed him, there wasn't much that he did that could be considered the work of a professional fighter, but he was all about legalizing a certain herb. And yes, he's entitled to his viewpoint, but promoting it and posing for pictures with it was taking it a bit too far. He was a professional fighter in the UFC after all. The issue is also a big deal, and the UFC wasn't too into weed being a part of MMA. And his use of it was also the reason that Diaz got a suspension after he lost the championship to Carlos Condit at UFC 143. The fact that he was genuinely gifted made his whole situation even harder to bear. Diaz's ban was reduced to only 18 months. What's more, we've got Chris Leben next. The Octagon's not the place where Leben stirred controversy, but once he'd get out, you'd find him engaging in plenty of it. It was to the point point that his ability within the cage began to take the back seat for the observer. He was arrested for a DUI, tested positive for steroids months after the fight with Michael Bisping, and got suspended after his oxycodone test came back positive following his UFC 138 loss against Mark Munoz. It kinda seemed like Levin tended to get his way. His run-ins with the law, coupled with his relationship with drugs, were what made him controversial. Now for Colby Covington. Covington kinda flew below the radar controversy-wise until his post-fight UFC Sao Paulo interview came out in 2017. He went all out in that one. He used the word filthy animals for the crowd. The reason seems to be that he was informed by the UFC that he'd be cut from the roster because he was boring. So Covington took matters into his own hands and did what he thought could save him from that. But it did end up costing him. People began disliking him for his persona. His friends left him, and he was also forced to quit the American top team since his teammates were kinda over him. So he divided a lot of people in his pursuit of the championship. Next up, it's Jon Jones. There's absolutely no doubt that the dude's got greatness. He's one of the very best that the UFC has seen, but his controversial moments do shine too. He's been a part of it all. From visits to prison to flunking drug tests, Jones made headlines back in 2012 when he got busted for driving under the influence. That's not a good reason to be on the news when you've got such a brilliant career that could put you on the screens. Anyway, he drove his Bentley Continental GT into a pole in Binghamton, New York. Things again didn't seem too great when he failed a drug test ahead of his fight against Daniel Cormier at UFC 182. Jon was also a part of a hit and run. Apparently, he crashed into two vehicles after running a red light. In one of those cars, there was a pregnant woman. Bones abandoned the scene at first, but then came back later to gather up the cash he'd left behind. He was arrested on a warrant, but was released after posting a $25,000 bail. Again, Jones failed a drug test at UFC 200, which led to him being pulled out from his scheduled fight against Ovince St. Preux. And even though Jones later came back and won at UFC 214 against Daniel Cormier, he was later stripped of the title when his test came back positive for turinabol, an anabolic steroid. The controversy doesn't end there. There's been so much of the same since. Further up, Sean Strickland. Sean's a fan of saying things that just rub people the wrong way. It's really hard to understand how much of it is a persona talking and how much of it's just meant to garner attention. When it comes to his political beliefs, it gets a little confusing. However, the guy's on record talking about several political topics. Strickland's put himself down as a gun user in the past and has since gone on to criticize other countries to have strict gun laws. He's also said that other countries, especially Germany and England, might have fewer shootings, but they also don't have many real men. He's also resorted to slurs when talking about these nations. Plus, Sean found himself in very hot waters after he claimed that he didn't have any allegiance to the American flag. And that wasn't just it. He went ahead, clarifying just how controversial he meant to be by saying that he'd have no objections to being a Russian mercenary who hunted Americans, provided he was paid well enough. Yikes. So, if you're looking for statements that are sure to catch your attention, you might want to look into Sean Strickland. Finishing up with Conor McGregor. Conor is a superstar. His loud and ruthless language in the octagon has made him a very popular figure, but he's been in the news for some other stuff too. In 2017, McGregor created a whole lot of commotion in the Bellator cage when he stormed right in to celebrate the victory of his teammate, Charlie Ward. Even though it hadn't been made official by the referee yet, when Goddard, the referee, stepped in to stop him, Conor yelled in his face and was incredibly disrespectful. Also, the fighter attacked an old man in a Dublin bar when the man refused to taste McGregor's proper 12 whiskey. Whew, think about that. Poor man. It's just totally chaotic behavior. Additionally, he bought the bar and banned the entry of the old man. This is just the tip of the iceberg with Conor McGregor. His career's been controversial throughout. That's all for today from our side. Which UFC star is the most controversial do you think? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Goodbye for now, and see you at the next one.